Okay, so someone sent us this document, and let me tell you, it's a doozy. It's called Why Conventional Bodybuilding Methods Suck, with, the rest of the title and the alternative approach that really delivers pretty straightforward, right? But the thing is, it's written by this guy, Stuart McRobert, and he really doesn't pull any punches. Our listener wanted a clear breakdown of his arguments and, well, maybe a shortcut to the main takeaways.
Yeah, he jumps right in, that's for sure. Doesn't waste any time.
Exactly. Like the first thing he says is that conventional bodybuilding dogma is, and I quote, a total sham. He claims it actually stops people from reaching their physique goals.
Yeah, and he calls this document a scathing report, which, it is. But there's this positive spin he puts on it, like by understanding what's wrong, we can find a better, more effective way to train.
Right. He's all about exposing the squalid mess, as he puts it, so people can finally train, intelligently. He even compares the whole thing to the tobacco industry.
That's a pretty strong analogy. Basically, he's saying there's this deceptive facade, this, glossy surface, hiding something that's actually harmful.
Totally. And to understand where he's coming from, it's worth noting that this document is from 2000, and he's offering it as a free resource. So clearly he's trying to get his message out there.
He's very confident in his message, too. He basically says anyone who finds his statements alarmist is either, well, way out of touch or, and I quote, promoting a lie.
Strong words. He sees himself as like a rebel with a cause. And that cause is to dismantle what he calls the bull, deceit, fraud, drugs, lies, and absurd training practices he believes are all over mainstream bodybuilding.
He really emphasizes the urgency of moving away from these ineffective methods.
Yeah.
Reminds us, life is in short supply.
True that. Okay, so the document itself has a clear structure. Starts with a preface, then he lists all the problems with conventional bodybuilding. Then he talks about related issues like drug use, misleading role models, and all that. And finally, he lays out his alternative approach.
Yeah, that'll be helpful for our deep dive. And by the way, if you're listening and you've ever felt like you're hitting a wall in the gym or you're confused by all the complicated routines or maybe you're a bit skeptical of the crazy claims you see everywhere, McRobert's speaking directly to you.
Yeah, he's focused on what he calls the hard-gaining masses, which is, let's be honest, most of us. He's saying that these popular methods, they just don't deliver the goods for most people.
Right. So I guess the big questions are, what exactly are McRobert's main criticisms of conventional bodybuilding, and what does his alternative actually look like?
Exactly. So first things first, how does McRobert even define conventional bodybuilding? What's he talking about specifically?
He says it's the training practices. Those routines, they're typical of, those elite bodybuilders, strength athletes, the stuff you see in magazines, books, even on TV sometimes.
Okay, so lots of volume, lots of isolation exercises,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, he's specific about it. He says it usually involves training 4 to 6 days a week, doing multiple exercises per muscle group, and at least 3 work sets per exercise. And that's not even including warm-ups.
Okay, that sounds pretty intense. All right, so what are his main problems with this approach?
Well, he's got this numbered list, 9 criticisms in total. The first one is overtraining. He says these conventional methods, they just overtrain most people who aren't, genetically gifted or using drugs.
Right, you hear about that a lot, people hitting plateaus, even getting injured. So what's next on the list?
Number 2, promoting high-risk exercises. Exercises that are likely to lead to injuries.
Makes sense. So he's worried about the exercises themselves. What's number 3?
He says they encourage dangerous techniques, even within exercises that might be safe otherwise. So, like risky ways of doing even basic exercises.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. So both the exercises and the way people do them. What's next?
Criticism number 4 is the impractical volume and frequency. Like those 4 to 6 days a week, he says, that's just not realistic for most people who have jobs, families, lives outside the gym.
Right, it's like a full-time job in itself. So not just ineffective, but also unsustainable for most people. What's number 5?
He talks about the exaggerated importance of supplements. He thinks conventional bodybuilding makes it seem like supplements are absolutely essential, when in reality, they can't fix a bad training program.
Yeah, there's a lot of hype around supplements, so he's skeptical about that. What about criticism number 6?
This one's about misleading role models and exaggerated expectations. He says the media uses those genetically gifted, often drug-using individuals as the standard. And that sets unrealistic expectations for the average person.
Totally. Like, how can you compare yourself to someone who's genetically predisposed to build muscle easily and might be using, something extra?
Right. It's a recipe for disappointment and potentially even harmful practices. Okay, number 7 is all about complication and confusion. He thinks the routines are made unnecessarily complex with too many exercises and techniques, which just confuses people.
Yeah, too much information, not enough clear guidance. What's his 8th point?
Lack of personalization. He says these one-size-fits-all methods, they ignore individual needs, limitations, goals, and that leads to overtraining, injuries, and, well, people just giving up.
That makes a lot of sense. People are different. They respond differently to training. So we're on the last one now, number 9. What is it?
Okay, this one might be the most controversial. He says conventional training methods actually encourage drug abuse.
Oh, okay, that's a pretty strong statement. Tell me more about that.
Well, his argument is that those high-volume, high-frequency routines, they often only work if you're using drugs. And by promoting them, the mainstream is, in a way, endorsing drug use, at least implicitly.
So he sees that as a big ethical issue within the fitness industry. Now, he spends a lot of time discussing the drug problem in general, doesn't he?
Yeah, he really hammers home the point that drug use is rampant in bodybuilding, and the mainstream often downplays it or just ignores it completely. He even uses the phrase calamitous fallout to describe the negative consequences.
Like what kind of negative consequences?
He talks about dishonesty, people hiding their drug use, and also the promotion of ineffective training methods to those who are, naturally training.
Makes sense. Okay, so then he goes on to discuss this idea of training like a champ. What's his take on that?
He calls it one of the most costly frauds in the fitness world. He basically says the training methods used by elite athletes who are often genetically gifted and using drugs are just not appropriate for the average person.
Right, it's like comparing apples and oranges. You can't expect to train like a professional athlete and get the same results if you're not a professional athlete.
Exactly. He says the success of a few champions hides the failure of the majority who try to copy them.
And he even talks about his own experience with this, right?
Yeah, he talks about how early in his training, he followed those champion routines, but he made very little progress. And now he understands that it was because of the differences in genetics and drug use.
So it's personal for him. And it's not just about current bodybuilders, right? He even questions the advice from past legends.
Yeah, he talks about those bodybuilders from the, pre-drug era. But his point is, even those guys, they were often genetically exceptional, and their routines were still too much for the average person.
So even the golden era guys weren't necessarily a good model for most people. He uses Bill Pearl as an example, right?
Yeah, Bill Pearl, who, later admitted to using steroids. But his earlier training advice, it was given without that context, so it misled a lot of people.
And he talks about the changes in physiques over time, like from the 1960s onwards.
Right, those dramatic changes in size and muscularity. He attributes that to, the rise of steroid use, not just better training methods.
Okay, so basically the takeaway from this first part is conventional bodybuilding wisdom, as it's presented, is largely irrelevant and potentially harmful for the average drug-free person because it's based on those genetically gifted, often drug-enhanced individuals.
Exactly. Now, in the second part, he gets into this idea of want creation, how the industry creates a need for all this stuff.
Yeah.
What's the driving force behind that, according to him?
Well, he argues that the focus on those complex training programs and all the supplements, it's not really about what's most effective, but about creating demand, generating profit.
Yeah, simple, effective training doesn't really make companies a lot of money.
Exactly. He's particularly critical of dietary supplements.
Yeah, he says they're incredibly profitable because, people keep buying them. And there's so much potential for hype and marketing.
Right. It's a consumable product, so you need to keep buying more. And he believes that leads to some pretty shady practices.
Definitely. He talks about things like fake endorsements from, supposedly successful athletes.
Yeah.
And fabricated research, those claims about how effective the product is, which are just made up.
Wow. So he's saying there's a lot of deception going on.
Yeah. And also exaggerated promises of results and even manipulated photos and advertising. He thinks all of this is driven by, well, greed, basically, the desire for profit.
So it's a system that benefits the sellers more than the buyers, in his view.
Exactly. And he describes this vicious cycle where, because conventional training doesn't work for most people, they get frustrated and start looking for other solutions.
Like supplements, maybe even drugs.
Yeah, exactly. And that just fuels the industry even more, and the cycle continues.
Okay, so that's his critique. Now, let's get to the good stuff.
Okay.
His alternative approach. What's it all about?
Well, he calls it the hardgainer approach. because it's specifically designed for those with average genetics who are, training naturally without drugs.
Got it. So what are the main principles behind this alternative?
He has another numbered list, 6 key principles this time. First one, reduce training frequency.
Hmm.
He says most people only need to train 2 to 3 times a week max, and sometimes even less is better.
Interesting. So not those crazy 4-6 day splits you see everywhere. What else?
Principle number 2, limited exercise variety and avoiding high volume. So instead of tons of exercises per muscle group, he suggests focusing on a few key movements.
So quality over quantity. What about the rest of the principles?
Number 3 is skepticism towards those bodybuilding supplements. He's not saying they're all bad, but he stresses that they're not essential and they can't replace good training and nutrition.
That makes sense. You can't out-supplement a bad diet or a bad training program. What's number 4?
Ignoring the hype. He basically says tune out all the noise, the crazy claims, the trends, and just focus on the fundamentals.
Less stress, more results. What about the last 2 principles?
Number 5 is prioritizing safety. Avoiding risky exercises, using proper technique, all that.
Smart. Safety should always come first. And the final one?
Rejecting drug-influenced practices. Basically, don't try to copy those who are using drugs, because it won't work for you, and it could be harmful.
So it's a more minimalist, sustainable, and maybe even more common sense approach. Now, he also lays out a more specific success formula with 15 points, right?
Yeah, it's like a blueprint for his method.
Yeah.
The first point is simple routines. He says max 6-8 exercises per workout, even fewer for some people.
Okay, so we're already seeing that less is more philosophy. What's next?
Point number 2, focus on big compound movements. Those exercises that work multiple muscle groups like squats, deadlifts, dips, chin-ups.
Right, those are the big ones. What else is in the formula?
Point 3 is the training frequency again, no more than twice a week. And point 4 is alternating between 2 different workouts for variety.
So he's not saying do the same workout twice a week.
Nope. He wants you to have 2 different routines that you alternate between. Okay, point 5 is about rest, taking extra rest days if needed. Point 6 is mastering exercise form, using perfect technique.
Can't stress it enough. Proper form is crucial.
Absolutely. Number 7 is about controlled rep speed, taking 2-3 seconds for the lifting phase and at least 3 seconds for the lowering phase.
So really focusing on the movement, feeling the muscles work.
Exactly. Point 8 is thorough warm-up. Point 9 is no more than 3 work sets per exercise. And number 10, this is a big one, progressive overload.
That's all about getting stronger over time, right?
Yeah, consistently adding weight to the bar while maintaining good form. That's how you build muscle and strength long term. Okay, point 11 is about nutrition, eating a high-quality, protein-rich diet.
Makes sense. You gotta fuel those muscles.
Right. Point 12 is spreading your meals throughout the day, 5 or 6 smaller meals. Point 13 is experimenting with protein intake to find what works best for you.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach to nutrition either.
Definitely not. Okay, point 14 is crucial. Getting 8 or more hours of quality sleep every night.
Sleep is so important for recovery and overall health.
Absolutely. And the final point, number 15, is conserving energy on your off days to allow for better recovery.
So it's not just about what you do in the gym, but also about how you manage a recovery outside the gym. Now, he specifically criticizes those smaller isolation exercises, doesn't he?
Yeah, he calls them small for a reason.
Yeah.
He thinks they're pretty much a waste of time for most people.
Interesting. So he's all about those big compound lifts.
Yep, those are the foundation of his approach. He thinks you should focus on getting stronger in those movements, and the rest will follow.
And he even says he wishes he had followed this approach from the beginning, right?
Yeah, he says if he had, he probably would have made much better progress and avoided injuries.
So he's speaking from experience, and he ends with a pretty strong call to action for the listener, doesn't he?
Yeah, he encourages everyone to stop repeating those same mistakes, take control of their training, and focus on a sustainable, personalized approach.
So to sum it all up, his main argument is that conventional bodybuilding is based on the practices of genetically gifted, often drug-enhanced individuals, and those practices just don't translate well to the average person.
Right, and he offers a simpler, more effective, and arguably more sensible alternative that's focused on those big compound lifts, progressive overload, recovery, and proper nutrition.
Now, what's interesting is the challenge he poses to the entire fitness industry. He's basically saying, don't blindly trust those big names, those flashy advertisements, those complicated routines. Think for yourself, question everything, and find what works best for you.
Exactly. So our final thought for you today is this. Where are you getting your training information from? Are those sources truly serving you, or are they just selling you something?
Think about it. Are you chasing unrealistic expectations, or are you focusing on what truly matters for your long-term progress?
And if you're interested in learning more about McRobert's approach, he suggests checking out his website, www.hardgainer.com. He also has several books that go into much more detail.
This deep dive has hopefully given you a good overview of his philosophy, but remember, it's just a starting point. The real journey is yours to take. Experiment, learn, and discover what works best for you.
And don't be afraid to go against the grain, to challenge the status quo. Sometimes the most effective path is the one less traveled.
Well said. That's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
See you then.